Welcome to the Ultimate Sports Podcast. Tonight's guest is the host of the PFG Vibecast. He writes for Fansides, NFL Spin Zone, Elite Sports New York, and a lot more. Russ Baxter, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Madison. How are you?
I'm good. Alrighty, so we have a game tonight between the Raiders and the Chargers. We'll get into that later. We're at the midpoint of the season. Which team has been your most surprising team thus far this season? The team that's surprised you the most?
Well, Julie Boyd and I talked about this on our podcast last night. To me, it's the Carolina Panthers.
Wow.
This was a team that got off to an 0-2 start. A lot of uncertainty with Cam Newton not going to be around. And as we have learned over the course of the last 2 months, basically, that the Carolina Panthers work a lot better when they have a healthy quarterback. And that just wasn't the case with Cam, who was hampered early in the season. In steps Kyle Allen. But more importantly, I think their offensive line has played better than expected. I wasn't sure if Christian McCaffrey would be as good as he was last year. I think he's actually been better. And the defense has been a little bit of a surprise in terms of, Gerald McCoy coming in and Brian Burns coming in and them creating turnovers and, 0-2. And now 5-3. I know they got their world rocked a little by the San Francisco 49ers. That's seemingly happened to a lot of teams this year. But I would say it's the Panthers.
Yeah, that's a good call. I'd say the 49ers. I just wasn't sure what to expect from them this season. Garoppolo coming off the ACL. They've been a pleasant surprise to me this year, especially defensively. A lot of guys on that team really have had some breakout years, and Nick Bosa's one of the best rookies in the league. He's been the leader of their pass rush. So I'm going to say the 49ers have surprised me the most, but I get your Panthers pick because of Kyle Allen and because of the offensive line. So I could see that too with the Panthers. But yeah, they've certainly been a surprise.
I'll say this about the 49ers and what Nick Bosa has done to them. You look at all those teams, those players they drafted in the first round on the defensive line. DeForest Buckner has been a guy who's played pretty well for them. But Eric Armstead has been a little bit of a disappointment. Solomon Thomas a little bit of a disappointment. They also traded for Dee Ford. To me, Nick Bosa, for those of us who barbecue the old-fashioned way with charcoal, they had a bunch of charcoal, and Nick Bosa turned out to be the lighter fluid.
Yeah, he's very good. I really am a big fan of Nick Bosa. Who has been the most disappointing team, in your opinion, this season?
Well, for me, it's the Atlanta Falcons. I expected a lot more from them. I expected more on defense. That Dan Quinn took over that side of the ball. They did not bring back a defensive coordinator, and they're lifeless. They have 7 sacks in 8 games. I know Keanu Neal's out again. He missed most of last season. He's missing the rest of this season, but it doesn't explain everything else. And, Matt Ryan, I think, has been pressed a little. They don't run the ball. They haven't been effective running the ball, 29th in the league in rushing. No balance. Matt Ryan, a lot of turnovers this year, which wasn't the case last season. This is a team that's lost, 6 games in a row now since they beat the Eagles in primetime in week 2. So as strange as it may sound, though, and they're 6 games behind. What's interesting about their season, and to a degree, Madison, the Saints, Atlanta's 1-7. They haven't played anybody in their division yet. Not one game. And now they're getting ready to play 5 straight games in the division. In fact, the Saints have played 1 divisional game. They're getting ready to play 4 straight games in the division. These teams are going to meet on Sunday. They're going to meet on Thanksgiving. I'm not saying Atlanta's going to salvage its season. I mean, they would have to run the table just to get 9-7. And honestly, in the NFC this year, I don't even know if 10-6 guarantees you get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think you might need to go 11-5 to get a wild card. I remember one year the NFC was loaded. I believe it was Bruce Arians' first year at the Cardinals. They went 10-6, and they didn't even make the postseason. So sometimes 10-6 doesn't guarantee you the playoffs. I know the Giants went 10-6 one year and didn't make the playoffs. So 10-6 does not guarantee the playoffs every year. So That's a distinct possibility in that conference.
Isn't it funny with the Giants? They went 10-6 one year and didn't make the playoffs, I believe. I think they also went 10-6 one year and won the Super Bowl one year. They also, I think, have gone 9-7, and they won a Super Bowl at 9-7. So I mean, the Giants are really odd when it comes to that stuff. You never know. I mean, of course, New England the year in 2008 where Brady missed most of the year, they actually went 11-5 and didn't make the playoffs.
That's right.
We had a stretch there where you had a couple of Tampa one year 10-6 missed the playoffs. We had a stretch there where a bunch of 10-6s weren't making it. But you just look at the strength of the NFC. The AFC is different. Okay, I mean we're sitting here right now. Obviously, 6 teams, Madison, make the playoffs from each conference. Well, right now there's only 6 teams above 500 in the AFC, which means 10 teams are 500 or below. I mean, you've got the Raiders at 4-4 and Pittsburgh's 4-4, and you got a slew of 4 and 5s and so on. And it's kind of a top heavy year. It's also kind of a weird year. You know how it is in terms of we annually see 4 or 5 different playoff teams, and there's a long way to go before the playoffs. So don't get me wrong, but everybody in first place in the AFC were the teams that won the division last year. Dallas and New Orleans, 6 of the 8 teams that won the division this year are currently in first place.
Yeah, that's right, because the Browns, the Bears are one of them that's not, and the other one's the Rams. So those are the kind of too easy to figure out. Obviously, the AFC is the same, although the Colts are battling out with Houston, and then the Bills are surprisingly at 5-2 or 6-2, and then you have the Raiders that are at 500. You have the Chargers are 1 game under. So there's a little competition with, especially in the South there.
Yeah, and the South is kind of always like that. You remember a couple years ago in 2017, this was the order of finish: Jacksonville, Tennessee, Indianapolis, Houston. And Jacksonville and Tennessee went to the playoffs in 2017. Last year, it was what I call the Poseidon Adventure, completely reversed. Houston, Indy, Tennessee, Jacksonville, and Houston and Indy went to the playoffs. So you can never tell. I mean, Jacksonville and Tennessee are within earshot. No one's really kind of pulled away in that division whatsoever. Houston to me has a chance to do some damage because of what they are offensively right now, and more than just Deshaun Watson. They are running the ball with Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson, and they look pretty good doing it.
Yeah, they are running the ball very well. In terms of my most disappointing team, I'd have to say the Browns. I really thought that they'd be a 10-6 division winner this year. I was dead wrong about them. They're sitting there at 2-6, and Baker Mayfield obviously hasn't built on his rookie season. That offensive line's not good. Odell hasn't really performed expectations either. So they, to me, are a very disappointing team this season. What are your thoughts on the Browns?
Well, it's funny. I was talking about this with somebody else today. Sometimes you have games in sometime during the season, and they could be turning point games. And I go back to week 4, okay, at Baltimore, and the Browns went in there and smacked the Ravens around. You remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, and it got them to 2-2 and a road divisional win. You think, oh, here they come. Well, lo and behold, the Ravens haven't lost a game since, and the Browns haven't won a game since. So I guess so much for momentum, Madison.
Yeah, so much for momentum. Although sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You could a good example could be the Chargers tonight. If they win, then we're talking about 3 straight wins back in the playoff picture. So that applies to the Chargers tonight. If they win, then we're going to be talking about momentum. Who's your league MVP right now?
I think it's Russell Wilson. To me, you think of what the Seahawks would be without him. This is not a great defensive team. In fact, they've given up the 5th most passing yards in the league. Mediocre against the run. Their defense wasn't great last year, and this year, struggling to a degree even more. Think about this. They are a 7-2 football team, Madison. Their point differential is +18. They've won 30-29. They've won 40-34. They won, they beat Pittsburgh 28-26, something like that. Mm-hmm. Russell Wilson, 22 touchdown passes, 1 interception. Unfortunately for him, it was a pick six. So I think he's really kind of carrying the team, to be honest with you, because they don't have the defense that they've had in previous years. In fact, and their defense from a year ago was decent when it came to takeaways, and they're kind of thriving on that as well this year. But when you watch them, they really don't stop anybody.
Yeah, it's really just the Russell Wilson show. Although some of his weapons have been very good, Lockett stepped up. That tight end that was playing well for them earlier in the year, Disley, he was out for the season. That's a big loss for them. And then DK Metcalf has come on a little bit. I like that kid a lot. So Russ really has carried them, and he's my MVP as well. Some storylines around the league. The Redskins fired Jay Gruden about a month ago. Bill Callahan's in there now. Where do you think they're going to go in terms of a new coach? Do you think they hire somebody with experience, or do you think they hire one of these coordinators that are on the rise?
It's hard to tell. I mean, all I know is Daniel Snyder's been there since the spring of 1999, and if he hires a new coach, it'll be coach number 10 in a 20-year span. I think about the Pittsburgh Steelers who've had 3 head coaches in 50 years. And, I think it's indicative of the instability with the Redskins and what goes on there and so on. It's hard to tell, and it's hard to tell who exactly is going to be the hot ticket item by the time, the offseason rolls around. I think a lot of it will do depending on the bowl games and so on. I know Lincoln Riley's a name out there, but you know as well as I do, the shelf life of a Redskins head coach under Daniel Snyder hasn't been very long. When it was all said and done, Jay Gruden turned out to be his longest tenured head coach.
Yeah, he has been there a long time. That's why I was surprised he wasn't fired 2 years ago. Like, he was a hot seat coach the last probably 3 years and wasn't fired until this season. But yeah, I'm interested to see what direction they go in. I know Lincoln Riley's heavily tied to the Cowboys job and has been tied to that job for a long time now. But who knows what happens with Jason Garrett. I think they have to go to at least the NFC title game or maybe even the Super Bowl for him to save his job, right?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell what it goes. I mean, sounds. Jason Garrett is the second longest tenured coach in the history of the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, my God.
Behind Don Landry. Okay, think about that for a bit. He was hired in the middle of 2010 when they dumped Wade Phillips after they lost a really Monday night game to the Green Bay Packers up in Lambeau Field, and he's been there ever since. So what do you say? Let's be honest. Who's really running the show down in Dallas when it's all said and done?
Jerry Jones.
It never ceases to amaze me to watch anytime you're trying to get information on the Dallas Cowboys and you're expecting the head coach to be at the podium, and that's not to say he doesn't appear, but who's more visible? It's usually Jerry Jones, and it's not Jason Garrett, and I think that's the crux sometimes of some of their issues. They're a hard team to figure out. They beat up on the NFC East, especially this year. They're 4-0 in the division. Not as great elsewise, even struggled against the Miami Dolphins early in the year before they eventually pulled away. So, but that 3-game losing streak, right after the 3-game winning streak, it definitely is something that you have to be concerned about, to be that streaky in this day. And they have a tough assignment coming up Sunday night when the Vikings come to town.
Yep. It is a tough assignment for them, and the Vikings are missing Adam Thielen that game, which should it's going to hurt Minnesota because Thielen's just a great wideout for Kirk Cousins in that offense, and he likes to spread the field and stuff. So I think that's a big loss for the Vikings. I think the Cowboys can absolutely win that game on Sunday night. Speaking of the Vikings, a team in their division is the Chicago Bears. Mitch Trubisky has been terrible this season. What do you think the future holds for him, and do you think they could potentially go after Cam Newton in the winter, spring, like people are suggesting?
Well, it would be mind-boggling for me to give up on Mitch Trubisky that quickly. And, when Ryan Pace made the deal and move up to get him, they knew what they were getting. They were getting a developmental quarterback. He only started a dozen games at North Carolina, okay? They could have had, obviously, Deshaun Watson. They could have had Patrick Mahomes, who obviously had longer tenures at their respective schools. So Ryan Pace got what he wanted, okay? As it turned out, he's on his second head coach and his second system and so on. I mean, think about it, Madison. How long has Mitch Trubisky actually played quarterback? It's not very long. It's kind of like Jimmy Garoppolo. Think about Jimmy Garoppolo in the 6 years he's been in the NFL. How many games has he actually played? It's hard to get better when you don't play.
Exactly. It's hard to get better when you don't really play. But that, to me, has been the most disappointing team in the NFC. Them and obviously Atlanta, who you mentioned before. We talked about the Panthers to start the show. I was going to ask about Cam Newton's future at the team, but I kind of tied that in with Trubisky a little bit because there's speculation about Cam Newton possibly starting for the Chicago Bears next year. What do you think Carolina eventually does with Cam Newton?
Well, I would hope they hold on to him, and if they do decide to go in the direction of Kyle Allen, and correct me if I'm wrong, they also drafted Will Grier from West Virginia.
They did
this offseason. Okay, so Cam Newton is a physical quarterback who looks like his body is a little beat up right now. That's not to saying he can't heal. Okay, but the shoulder injury now followed by the foot injury and so on. Listen, if he's showing wear and tear, Madison, what kind of value are you going to get trading him? Okay, I always hear people, trade. Well, people aren't going to, players and organizations aren't going to trade for a player that is on his last legs, okay, or last arms, or however you want to word it, and so on. So, I mean, that always kind of mesmerized me. It's like saying, well, I'm going to get $10,000 for the car that needs a new transmission. Okay, then it doesn't work that way. So, I think we have to see Cam Newton healthy first, and we have to see more out of Kyle Allen, and they have to find out what they have with Will Grier. People are so reactionary now. If a quarterback wins 4 or 5 games, all right, just trade the other guy. It doesn't work that way.
Nope, it does not. The Cardinals, to me, have been a little bit of a surprise for me thus far this season. They're not terrible, and Kyler Murray, I think, has played very well for most of the season. What are your thoughts about Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury in year 1 in Arizona?
Well, the last 2 weeks, they've kind of had to they've learned some tough lessons. Let's put it that way. And they ran into two of arguably the top 2 teams in their conference, in New Orleans and San Francisco. Before that, they had won 3 games in a row, and I credit the Cardinals for doing something by looking at the 3 teams they played, Madison, and exploiting their major weaknesses. They ran the ball over the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals' defense, especially against the run, is horrible. They threw the ball in Atlanta because Atlanta can't rush the passer. They have 7 sacks this year, and now they had even fewer when they played them. The Giants can't protect Daniel Jones, and he's turnover prone. So they sacked him 8 times. So then they run into the Saints. Well, go ahead. Tell me what aspect of the Saints is weak. Okay, end of question. They really don't have that many severe weaknesses. And what aspect of the 49ers is weak? Well, maybe the run defense a little bit and so on. So, they've stepped up the last 2 weeks, and now they get 2 road games. And ironically enough, this Sunday, they go to Tampa. And they're going to see 2 very, very familiar things in Tampa. One, a place where they lost the Super Bowl 11 years ago. But more significantly, the guy who was their head coach for a 5-year span and got them to the playoffs a couple of years. In fact, weird as it is, the Cardinals have beaten the Buccaneers 3 times in a row. And Bruce Arians was the Cardinals coach in each one of those games.
Yep. Yeah, I forgot about the Bruce Arians angle of this game when I looked at it at the schedule. I completely just blew my mind. I forgot all about that angle. That's a good thing you mentioned that. You think that he knows a little something about some of the players, although the roster's turned over a little bit. Although some of those players are still there, like Larry Fitzgerald, obviously still there. Chandler Jones, I believe, was there when Arians was there. So some of the guys are still there. Patrick Peterson, obviously. But that should be an interesting game down there in Tampa. Arians against his former team. Never even thought about that. An interesting game from this past weekend was when the Ravens handed the Patriots their first loss of the season. The Patriots are 8-1, but did you come away at all a little concerned with them? Because I did, especially with their offensive line a little bit, and then even their defense to some degree, their rush defense.
Well, I came away concerned with them, strange as it may sound, about one aspect of the game after they beat Cleveland, and that was their run defense. I saw what Nick Chubb did to them up the middle. I know he fumbled a couple of times, but they were able to gash the Patriots up front. I mean, the Patriots are a team that's forcing a lot of turnovers, and the strength of their team is really kind of the back end of their team. The secondary, some good line play after play, obviously from J.P. Collins and Hightower and, some of the, Kyle Van Noy, but mostly the secondary. But the defensive line, certainly a little bit of concern. Their offense is sporadic this year, be it health or be it lack of weapons or whatever you want to call it. It's not this steady flowing offense that we have seen in recent years from them. So, there's reasons to be concerned and reasons to be concerned because they're getting ready. They played a Baltimore team that likes to run the football. Okay. They're getting ready when they get back from their off week to play a Philadelphia team that likes to run the football. Then they play a Dallas team that likes to run the football. Then Houston, who likes to run the football. Then they get Kansas City. By the way, they're in the middle of a stretch, or the just start of a stretch, Madison, where they're playing 5 teams in a row that made the playoffs last year. So that's obviously a little bit of a contrast from their early season schedule, and the schedule is what it is and so on. So, when you watched them the other night, they really struggled to stop the run. And it wasn't just trying to stop Lamar Jackson, it was trying to stop the run overall.
Yeah, it was both Jackson and Mark Ingram that had big games against that Patriots defense on Sunday night. In Baltimore's division is the Cincinnati Bengals, and that happens to be their next opponent come Sunday. Andy Dalton was benched for Ryan Finley. Granted, the Bengals are 0-8 and are probably going to be picking in the top 3 in the draft. What do you make of the benching of Andy Dalton? Do you think this was overdue? Were you surprised about this or not?
No, I was a little surprised because, listen, they're having a bad year. They're dead last in the league in rushing, but their defense is abysmal, okay? I mean, I want to say 3 or 4 times this year a team has run for 200 yards on them. Not 100, but 200, okay? So how much that falls on Andy Dalton. But you also have a new head coach there, okay? And obviously new systems, and maybe it's, a changing of the guard eventually. So I'll be curious to see how it all plays out. I'll be curious to see if we see Andy Dalton again this year. So, Zach Taylor's just looking to get a win, okay? New head coach, tough situation, obviously. They get a rematch with the Ravens, who ran all over them. Lamar Jackson, and yet they hung in there as well. So it's been a dismal start to the year. They're the lone winless team. It's a team that was in the playoffs 5 years in a row, and now they can't seem to even manage a winning season. They've really fallen on hard times. But I don't know, Madison, how much of it really falls on Andy Dalton.
Yeah, they did make the playoffs the first couple of years of his career. I believe it was the first 5 years of his career. Maybe
it was the first 5 years.
It might have been 4. I think it might have been 4, but it could have been 5. But one year he was injured. He was injured the one year and they lost to Pittsburgh.
They got to the playoffs, and yes, and A.J. McCarron wound up starting in 2015 when Andy Dalton broke his thumb.
Right.
And so on. And that, of course, was the crazy disaster loss to the Steelers with Vontaze Burfict and Adam Jones with the personal fouls and giving the Steelers 30 yards of penalties down the stretch and them escaping with a win. But let's not forget, Marvin Lewis is gone. Andy Dalton had his problems in the playoffs. That's a franchise hasn't won a playoff game since 1990. And Andy Dalton and Marvin Lewis were nowhere to be found in 1990 in Cincinnati. Marvin Lewis.
Yeah, nowhere to be found in 1990. And even Marvin Lewis had a couple playoff teams in Cincinnati with Carson Palmer at quarterback before Palmer was traded over to Oakland. I remember they made the playoffs a few times with.
Yeah, they were in the playoffs. I mean, Marvin Lewis got that team to the playoffs 7 times, and unfortunately did not win a playoff game. They got there in 2005, they got there in 2009, but it just didn't pan out. But again, their playoff woes go way, way back as an organization. And it's funny because you think of some of the organizations in the league and ones that have struggled and so on, and yet this was a Bengals team in the 80s that actually went to a pair of Super Bowls. There's still 4 teams that have never gotten to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's very, very true. A team in the AFC that is having a good season right now is the Indianapolis Colts. Are you surprised that they're performing this well after the retirement of Andrew Luck? And then they have some injuries on their team with T.Y. Hilton injured and whatnot, and they might actually sneak in there in the AFC playoff picture. What do you make of the Colts?
I'm not surprised at all because Quentin Nelson didn't retire, did he?
Oh, that's true. Quentin Nelson, that guy's a very good player.
Yeah, Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith and that offensive line, and that's how the Colts are built now. Okay, and it's good to see that because we have seen over and over and over again when you build your team around the quarterback, okay, around the quarterback, it doesn't work. You have to build your team, not around one player, okay? Because if you build your team around one player and that one player is gone, you have the Indianapolis Colts of 2011. And Chris Ballard hasn't done that. Chris Ballard didn't build the Colts the last couple of years around Andrew Luck. He built the team and rebuilt the team and has really used the draft. And that's why, listen, they had a weird game at Pittsburgh last week, turned over the ball, lost Jacoby Brissett and so on. But that's a dangerous team because of their play in the offensive and defensive line. That's a team that, if they get in the playoffs this year, I would certainly warrant watching.
Yeah, that could be a sleeper in the postseason if they get there. Great offensive line. Their defense has some players I like. I love Darius Leonard, who I believe was the Rookie of the Year last year, the Defensive Rookie of the Year. But yeah, that's going to be a fun team to watch down the stretch. Who is a team that you think could be a surprise team in the second half of the season? You see this every single year. I mean, the Chargers one year kind of were a surprise and snuck in into the playoffs. I believe it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was the year before. I remember the Redskins were a second-half surprise back in RG3's rookie year and won the NFC East. Denver with Tebow in 2011. Who could be that team this year that could sneak up and potentially sneak in the playoffs?
Well, you're seeing what's going on with Pittsburgh right now. They were 1-4, now they're 4-4. They're doing something they haven't done the last few years, and that's take away the football. They got 22 takeaways this year. They had 15 all of last season. You just look at some of the other teams. Oakland intrigues me, although I think they have a tough night tonight against the Chargers team that, I think maybe got his confidence back after last week. We already talked about Indianapolis. Philadelphia is a hard team to gauge, but if they start doing what they're doing right now, and that's running the football again consistently and steady as they did against the Bills and the Bears, they can certainly rebound. I'll be curious to see what happens with Bills. Can they get by on a sporadic offense? And their defense has actually been susceptible to the run the last 3 or 4 games. So, but talking about the teams that are playing tonight, keep an eye on the Chargers. Eventually, they're going to get Derwin James back, and Melvin Gordon is now there, and Ingram and Bosa, spend an afternoon in the Green Bay backfield. So I wouldn't rule out the Chargers of making a second-half surge. They've made a habit of second-half surges, for a long time.
Yeah. Well, tonight really has a lot to do with a possible second-half surprise. I think if the Chargers want to go on a run, they probably have to win this game tonight. They're actually favored in this game. It sounds like you like the Chargers tonight. I actually disagree. I actually like Oakland at home. I like how they're playing. They've that breakout tight end, Darren Waller, and then Josh Jacobs is playing very well for them. And I think that offense might be the best unit on the field tonight in this game. So I think it'll be entertaining and competitive. I think the Chargers can absolutely win. But I just like the Raiders at home in a night game, and I just think that they're going to actually win this game outright. Do you like the Raiders or the Chargers today? It sounds like you're leaning towards the Chargers.
I'm leaning toward the Chargers because I am impressed with Oakland's offense. And Josh Jacobs, Madison, was actually my preseason Offensive Rookie of the Year selection. So you have to like what they're doing, but I'm still not sold on their defense. And are they going to be able to stop Melvin Gordon and Keenan Allen and whatever Philip Rivers throws at them, and Hunter Henry and so on? So my concerns are that. And is their offensive line going to be able to hold up against Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram and so on? So that to me is the interesting part about this game tonight. And, the Chargers have some opportunities coming up here with divisional games. They're going to get a lot of extra rest after this game at Oakland, and I believe the next time we see them is on a Monday night versus the Chiefs at Mexico City.
Yeah, that's right. The Mexico City game next week. That's going to be a fun game between those two offenses. Who is a team currently in the playoff picture that you can see falling out?
I think Buffalo could certainly be a team that warrants watching. I think the Rams, because they, offensively, they've been inconsistent. They got off to a good start. They kind of righted the ship the last couple of games. They played Atlanta and Cincinnati for what that's worth. I think they have a very interesting game at Pittsburgh this week. Can Jared Goff avoid the turnovers? Because he has been spotty, and we've seen what the Steelers have done as lately. And they really got pushed around by the 49ers. That 20-7 score when they lost at home to them was not indicative. I mean, this was a team last year that didn't lose a game in the division. And this year, they're 0-2 in the division. So, the Rams could maybe get hot and finish. They could be one of those 10-6 that don't make it. They're certainly in the playoff picture. Don't get me wrong, okay? But I tough road to hoe, and that's mostly because the division itself got a lot tougher this year.
Yeah, Seattle and San Francisco both are much better teams than people expected them to be this season. So when's your next PFG Vibecast going up?
Well, we just put up this morning. We're trying to get back into our weekly schedule, Julie and I. So don't be surprised by next Thursday morning that you have episode number 34 up there. But if you don't catch PFG Vibe on the Vibecast, you can catch PFG Pat on the Back. That's player and team, PAT. Those are our weekly awards. And I can assure you that Julie and I are going to be very, very busy over the next 2 months bringing you a lot of content.
Yes, absolutely. So it was a pleasure, as always, to have you on today. Maybe we'll try to get you on next month before the season ends. Hope you have a great night.
You too, Madison.